Hi, everyone, and welcome to our third and final Customer Discovery Workshop introduction video. Again, I am Mia Washington, the Assistant Program Manager here at Launch New York. Here's an overview of what you can expect to learn throughout the oncoming weeks. Mindset: the key to your success is prioritizing customer discovery before proceeding with your idea, developing a hypothesis and questions, finding people to interview, documenting your interviews in a spreadsheet, and how and when you'll summarize those learnings during short check-in meetings after every 15 interviews that you have. And now I'll turn it over to our program manager, Crystal Wallace.
Thank you, Mia. Again, I'm Crystal Wallace, the Founders Go Big Program Manager here at Launch New York. And I want to pick up where Mia left off with the 10 steps to success. Again, you're going to begin to start to have interview check-in meetings with Don and Crystal C. And by doing so, when you hit the 75th and the 150th interviews, we're going to have you start to aggregate some of that information into a spreadsheet. The goal is for us to use a data visualization tool called Power BI for you to be able to understand what you've gathered in terms of the data. It's going to help you be able to draw some conclusions, and we're going to take those top 5 conclusions and then help you learn how to defend those conclusions with the information that you have gathered in your interviews. Once that happens and you hit that 150th interview and you can summarize the data, then yay, you've reached graduation. And at that point, you can take that data and incorporate it into all of the investment prep documentation that you're working on with your EIR. We feel like customer discovery is crucial to helping founders focus on the initial pathway to customers. And that's what you demonstrate in your pitch deck and all the other documents that you work on with your mentor. But we also want to help you build the skills to identify other future pathways when the time comes. So even if you find some information that you weren't really expecting to hear in those interviews, it's a good thing because you can potentially use that for future markets down the line. But making sure that you have one singular go-to-market strategy for investors really does help convey that you are serious and looking to get into the market. And that then is also conveyed to investors, and it helps you to get create a clear path to scaling and growing. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our facilitators, and they're going to kick off the last video.
Thank you so much. I'm Don Delaria, and once again, I'm joined by Crystal Callahan, and we are going to walk you through the third and final part of our introduction to customer discovery, or what we like to call customer research. And that part 3 is called reporting what you've learned, right? So we're going to do a little bit of recap, and then we're going to go into the reporting dynamics, but let's jump right into the agenda. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how to find people to interview. And then we're going to talk about, again, what is customer discovery and what not. This is a good time to recalibrate on what it is and what it isn't before we send you out into the open to interview prospective customers to learn things you didn't know before. We're then going to talk about reporting your findings, how you can best organize your data and report your findings to Crystal and I in this case. But eventually, this is a skill that you'll need to learn to report your findings to prospective investors, right? So this is going to be a learned skill over the next several weeks. We'll then walk you through an example of a great report out and talk about how to schedule a meeting, which would be your next step in this journey. So let's get right to it. So how do I find people to interview, right? We get this question a lot, and it's actually it's really helpful to actually ask other people who are going through the customer discovery process. We learn more from our clients who are going through this journey than I think we could have come up with on day one ourselves. People come up with all sorts of interesting places to go and get interviews. A few off the top of our minds are things like malls and gyms and parks, transportation hubs, depending on what kind of customer group you're interviewing. Again, if you're interviewing we'll go back to that coffee shop example we covered in sections 1 and 2. If you're interviewing the customer, probably pretty easy to go interview customers at a Starbucks or in Buffalo here at a Spot Coffee or a Caribou if you're in other parts of the country, right? And get their opinions on coffee. But if you want to talk with, a coffee shop owner or a manager, might be a little bit harder. Let's say you have a product that you're selling into the middle of some big Fortune 500 company, some marketing person or some finance person, right? They're not likely, you're not going to run into them on the street, right? That's very unlikely. So that's when we start using things like LinkedIn and doing some networking within LinkedIn. Other people have found great success in Facebook groups to find experts and what we call subject matter experts. There's obviously social networks, but the one of the big things to understand here is it's different for everybody, right? Everybody is going to everybody going on this journey is going to have different groups they want to interview at different times. So what we encourage our clients to do is be super creative, try stuff. If it doesn't work, try something else, right? The other thing is schedule ahead. And most importantly, in the scheduling ahead part is planning for cancellations. So let's go back to that coffee shop example. And on day one, you could probably go out and start talking to people with, at a coffee shop, customers of, okay. But it might take you a while to get appointments set up with people who own coffee shops, or maybe somebody at Starbucks or somebody at Caribou or at Spot Coffee, okay? So those two pathways start at the same time, and you start doing interviews with customers, and you also start trying to schedule interviews with buyers, right? Owners, buyers, managers. And usually that will take you several weeks to get enough people on the calendar so that you have, sometimes when you're interviewing these mid-level executives or high-level executives, it can be a challenge to get 2 or 3 in a week. And so we encourage people to start that process early in their journey so that as they're kind of running their course with one customer group, the next one's already teed up and ready to run. Otherwise, you do a whole bunch of interviews and then you spend the next 6 weeks trying to get your next interview lined up to report out on. And that can be very demoralizing. So we ask people to kind of start all those pathways at the same time. I imagine, Crystal, you've got some stuff to add here too.
Would help
There we go.
if I wasn't muted. One thing that I've been thinking about, Don, and I just want to take a minute to reinforce here about why we're doing all of this, okay? Why this is so important. You may be thinking, oh man, now I gotta, all the things I have to do in my life and my family and the business. Now you're asking me to go out and find all these people to interview, right? Why is this so important? I just recently came up with this. I just Googled the US population, okay? I got 331 million people in the US, right? And so when you hear an entrepreneur say, when someone says, oh, who is your product for? Who are you trying to serve? Who's going to be, your initial targets? What's your strategy? And someone says, oh, anybody and everyone is going to love what I'm working on or what I'm building and what I'm doing. Okay. And as an investor, I'm thinking, okay, I'm preparing to try to give you, I don't know, maybe $30,000. And your answer to me is that you're going to use that $30,000 to try to reach 300 million people. Right. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. That's why this is so important. The techniques, then the skills that Don is teaching is so you can really start to drill down into who should I be spending my time and money and energy potentially getting this kind of product or service out to, and who not. And if you haven't done this kind of customer discovery and this level of detail, you are just going to be shooting out in the dark trying to figure out who to connect your product or service to. So I just wanted to share that as a reminder, another thought exercise to help you understand why we're being so tedious and so detailed with how to do a good job at this. It's just going to make every other part of your journey make that much more sense.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I want to make this a little bit more tangible for folks in case, you're kind of still stuck and trying to figure out, well, what do you mean by going to a mall? So I'll give you a few examples, right? We had a client not long ago that was selling a product that might have been appropriate for truckers to buy. And so she planted herself at a large pilot truck stop and actually went up to the person that was kind of behind the counter and say, hey, I'm trying to conduct some interviews with truckers to get their opinions on some things, just some market research. Is there any way you can help me out? And the person behind the counter actually got on the PA system in the truck stop and said, hey, there's a real nice gal in the corner over there doing interviews. And she'd love to get, the opinions of some truckers on various things. And she got like 20 interviews in an afternoon. She had more people coming up to her than she knew what to do with, right? So there's one example of somebody that just hit the jackpot on getting interviews with one simple little, ask. We've seen people come through, clients come through that are in the fashion. I guess one was in fashion and one was in kind of home furnishings, both of whom very successfully, I'll say, infiltrated Facebook groups. They kind of joined in on the group, kind of joined in on the conversation. And then after a little while posed this question, hey, I'm doing some market research on a topic. If you would be willing to spend a few minutes talking with me, just message me, right? And they both got a number of folks. We had another client at one point that was doing a product around keeping track of your children, kind of an air tag, so to speak, for your child. And he was a very large, imposing guy. And he had just come from a workout session. So he's kind of sweaty and hot and everything, big guy. And he stood out in front of a daycare center and was kind of like aggressively asking people coming out of the daycare, men and women, can I talk to you for a second? Okay, well, first of all, didn't look professional, didn't probably wrong time, right? People are trying to get out of daycare, into the car, off to home or the grocery store or whatever. Probably not a great time. And so we suggested to him, hey, maybe try the park, right? Go to the park. And if you see somebody sitting on the bench and their kids are playing, just say, hey, I'm doing some market research. Would you have a few minutes? Right. Had a much better success rate at the park than, so you have to be cognizant of when am I, trying to get these people to spend some time with me. Right. And you'll find that sometimes it's a lot easier when people have a little bit of downtime or they might be scrolling on their phone. They might be willing to actually spend a little time with you. If they're kind of in a rush going from point A to point B, might not be the best spot to be. So let's continue our review real quick and we'll go on to what customer discovery and what is not customer discovery, or as we like to sometimes call it, customer research, right? So first of all, the best customer discovery is when you are doing it and you're doing it in person, face to face, okay? We are perfectly happy to accept, video calls with folks or even phone calls. But what we don't want to do is surveys, and polls and things like that. That's very impersonal. It doesn't give you a chance to kind of ask the next question, depending on what the first answer was. So that you're doing it and you're doing it as much as possible in person. Another one is ask the how, the who, and the why questions. And we talked earlier about what are your, 3 or 4 biggest challenges? What are you doing about it? Is it working, and why? Right? That kind of falls into these big open-ended questions will get people to open up and talk about, what's most important to them. This is when it's important for you to listen. Your brain will probably be thinking, how do I sell this person my thing? Okay. You got to shut that part of your brain off. Shut it off right now. Ask them a question, ask them a how, ask them a who, ask them a why question, and then listen and record the answers. Then you can go back later and try and figure out exactly what they said and why they said it. But listen, don't try and sell them. This is not a sales call. This is a learning call. And the only way you're going to learn is if they're doing the talking and you're doing the listening, right? So, open-ended questions, the how, the who's, and the whys, let them talk. If they're talking about a topic that's way off target, like you say, what are your top 3 challenges? And they say their number 1 thing is X, but your product is way over here, it's Y, it's not even close. Let them go for a little bit, just to kind of get them into the talking, and then say, hey, would you mind if I redirect? I remember you said, one of your other big challenges was this other thing, right? And that gets them more aligned in the vertical that you want to learn about, right? So that's okay to interrupt in those scenarios, but let them go. Don't just, shut them down. Let them talk. Again, we want 10 to 15 interviews per week. Our goal is 150 overall. We already talked about interviewing all sides of the market, right? So the coffee shop owner, the person that's maybe working the machine itself, and then the person that's getting the output of that, the customer. At the end of the interview, super important, ask for that person's contact information. You might not get it, but if you do, the way to phrase it is, hey, I might have some additional follow-up questions, in a couple of weeks. Would you mind if I got a phone number or an email and I could just shoot you a couple of questions? Now, you may have follow-ups, you may not. I'd say in what, Crystal, like probably 80% of all of our clients, they get better at this over time, and they ask more and more questions as they go through the process. And if we don't have, all the answers from that first group, we kind of have to extend the requirement, and you end up having to get even more because we don't have good data. If you have the contact information, the 20 or 30 people you talked to at the beginning, you can just go back and ask them, a handful more questions. And now you've got a complete data set for everybody you've talked to. Okay. And just real quickly, things to avoid, and before I turn it over to Crystal, things to avoid, surveys and polls and outsourcing. This is not an activity you outsource. You need to hear it yourself. We don't like leading questions. And let me tell you, Crystal and I can spot if you've been doing leading questions before you even open your mouth. We know it's coming. We've heard it so many times, right? So that is, what do you think of my thing? Is basically the leading question. Would you buy this thing I'm holding in my hand and that I love dearly and my mom loves and thinks I'm the best child ever, right? Would you buy this thing? Right? We don't want to do that, right? How much would you pay for this thing I'm holding, right? Again, another leading question. You're basically showing them something. People want to confirm. They want to confirm for you that your thing is maybe valuable. But if you just ask them outright, they will tell you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear. And so if they don't know what you're selling, that's a much better scenario because we'll find out what they really think. And then, if you're doing a lot of the talking, right? So if you're talking 80, 90% of the time, you're probably not learning a whole lot because you're the one trying to sell something to somebody, not listen to them. So my commentary is over on this. So why don't I turn it over to Crystal?
Yeah, I've shared with you guys the story of Bradley, the entrepreneur that I was starting to work with, and he had spent all this time and all this money and hired these people overseas to build him this really slick app, right? And he spent $150,000 out of his own pocket to go out and build this thing. And then I said, hey, well, where's your customer discovery? And he said, what's that, right? And then, that's when I came to realize that he had done all this and hadn't talked to one living human. He was just sort of stuck in his head that this would be a great thing to build, but he hadn't talked to anyone to try to find out what their wants were, what their needs were, what they were looking for, what their previous habits had been. The other story I love sharing with you guys is about an entrepreneur. I'll call her Sarah. Sarah was the complete opposite. When I met with Sarah, she didn't have any tech built out. She hadn't built out a whole company and all these plans and all these products and things. She opened up her laptop and showed me an Excel spreadsheet. She said, this is what I've been doing for the last year or so. I've sat down with 200 people in my space. And I talked to them and I listened to them about what they wanted, what they needed, what their previous habits were, what problems they were facing, how they were solving their problems, and what solutions they were already using. And she had a detailed spreadsheet of every single person in her space that she had talked to and the answers to all of her questions to them. That is an entrepreneur that you can believe in. They have the credibility that you want to put your time, your expertise, and your money behind because you're convinced by the information that she gathered in that spreadsheet that she knows her market, her industry very well, and that if she's going to build something, it's an informed build because of all of the customer discovery research she did well before launching a business, a product, or a service.
Yeah, no, it's super important. Like I said, your credibility, remember we talked earlier about credibility. The person that comes in with a pile of research is credible. And at this stage of the game, we're buying your credibility. We're not buying your idea. That comes later. That comes in a Series A financing way down the road. We're going to be buying your technology and your idea and your team that you've assembled and the market opportunity. Right now, we're buying credibility. And it's pretty cheap to buy credibility right now. Right? It's pretty easy. It's not even that time consuming. So yeah, all good points. So now that we've done a little recap of, where to find people and kind of what it is and isn't, I want to dive into kind of the crux of today's topic, which is reporting findings, right? And coming prepared. So we didn't prepare this slide in particular just for the fun of it. This is actually the slide that we actually want you to follow, like verbatim. My name is Don. I have I'm testing, I forget what it was about my sun visors, right? I believe that my sun visor will improve visibility and whatnot. But you're going to state it in the words that we gave you, right? For stating a hypothesis. Who did I talk to this week? Okay. A good example of this would be, well, I talked to coffee shop customers. Okay. I didn't talk to any owners, didn't talk to any managers or workers in the store. I talked to customers. Okay. So now we know what you're testing. We know what group of people you talk to. So we're kind of primed as to what we think we might hear. You're going to tell us how many interviews you conducted, right? If you conducted, 10, 15, we know that you've talked to enough people this week to have a pretty good kind of summary view of what your findings were. If you say, well, I only got to talk to 2 people, we probably say, unless you have additional questions about the process, we're probably going to stop you right there and say, call us back when you have 12 or 15, right? Because 1 or 2 is not enough to be, wasting your time, wasting our time, right? You really got to commit to getting 10 or 15. That's why we're giving you the flexibility to schedule time with us when you have that many. Then we want to know, what did you learn, right? And a lot of times, especially early in the process, so I don't want to get on people too much, but it's very natural for people to kind of look at their data for the first time when they're talking to us and trying to report out. So they're kind of fumbling through. They're like, I don't know, what did I learn? Do us the favor of spending 5 minutes with your data before you get on the call, and maybe not the 5 minutes right before the call. And so you have some time to reflect. But look at your notes, look at your data, tell us what it's saying. Think about the reasons why people wouldn't buy my product, and maybe start there. You'll have a lot more credibility with me, at least. I don't know about Crystal. You have a lot more credibility with me if you start with, here are all the reasons I found why people don't want my product, right? Then I know you're listening. Right out of the gate, I know you're listening. We don't even have to go through that whole process of whether you're actually listening or leading the witness. Then you can talk to me about what you did learn. And then we start asking questions like, well, what are the common characteristics of those people that were saying things that are maybe inclined, to buy, a product that we might have. And we can really help you spend your next set of interviews focused on that group, right? Sometimes what happens is we call it going wide or going narrow. Sometimes you go wide, and what I mean by that is you kind of interview anybody and everybody. And it takes us a couple of weeks to narrow down into a group that seems to be saying more yes than no, which of course we want to learn, we want to learn more detail about the people that are saying yeses, that might be good candidates. Other times we start so narrow that it's restrictive, and we need to go a little bit wider. We need to interview a broader segment of the market to understand, well, did we just hit a bullseye right out of the gate? And there's a small group of people, and you just happen to find them right away, or is there a bigger group? And then we have context. We know, okay, that first group, yeah, it was a bullseye, but it's in this bigger group, and then we have context to be able to provide additional commentary. So that's always helpful. And then you end your report out with, oh, what am I going to do next week? Right. So your name, your hypothesis, who'd you talk to, or how many did you do this week? Who did you talk to, and what did you learn? Yeah, and now I'm either going to do more of those because I only have 15 and I want to interview more customers, or maybe I've rounded out my customer journey. I've got 40 or 50 of customers. Now next week I want to go and take a set of questions to coffee shop owners, right? So now we know what you've done and we know what you're going to do, and it's quick and we can give you a lot of good feedback. Crystal, I'm sure you've got some commentary here too.
Just reminders, guys, we can tell the people that are, in this instance, people who are listening to what we're advising you to do, listening to the instructions, paying attention, people who, now that you guys will have access to videos, people who are watching the videos more than once, taking notes, digesting the information, coming up with questions. We can tell when you show up at these meetings with us, we can tell the people who've been reviewing these slides over and over again regularly to refresh, to make sure that you've caught everything. Okay, so we just encourage you to take your time and show up prepared. You will get so much more out of the session. We can be so much more helpful to you. And because we're providing you with the video links and basically the Bible, right? Don has given you the Bible. This is the word, right? This is the truest version of how to do this and how to be really, really good at this. And again, it doesn't matter. We meet all kinds of entrepreneurs. We meet people who are just writing ideas in a notebook. We meet people who've already sold to 1,000, 2,000 clients. We meet everybody in between, and everyone can benefit from getting good at this and continuing to do it for the lifespan of your business. So just a reminder, you have all the tools at your fingertips to do a really good job at this. And when you show up for the meetings, we do have some pretty high expectations of you, because we're giving you so much tools and support. We're rooting for your success with this.
Yeah, because I fumbled it, I want to go back and retry. I'm gonna get a do-over here, right? We all get a do-over. If I were to do this for my earlier example about the sun visors, right? I'd say, hi, my name is Don Delaria. I believe that people who own convertibles will buy my sun visor to improve visibility on sunny days. Okay. I talked to owners of convertibles this week. I talked to 15 of those people. And what I learned was that people that drove like mostly Ford and Chevy convertibles were pretty satisfied with the sun visors they had already. They were sufficient size. They didn't mention any problems. In fact, they didn't talk at all about any problems. They're kind of wondering why I was even there. But then I found some people that owned Mazda Miatas, and boy, did they start talking to me about all kinds of problems they're having. It's loose, it flips down, it's not big enough, it doesn't come down far enough. People who were shorter found that was even bigger problem because they, didn't really get down far enough. They couldn't see, and they'd really like to have something that was different. Okay, and next week I'm going to focus more of my interviews on people that own Mazda Miatas. Okay, pretty simple, pretty concise. Okay, I'm going to give you another example on the next slide, and we're going to go back to our coffee shop example. Or actually, no, we're going to go to something completely different. I forgot about that. And I wanted to do this. Actually, this is with purpose, because I want to show you how fast that you can kind of figure out somebody's business and what they're testing on something completely new, right? So if somebody came up to you and said, hey, my name's Jill Washington. I'm from the plumbing scheduling app. And I believe that plumbing company owners will pay for my plumbing scheduling app because it will help them save time and cost of scheduling, fit more appointments into one day, and improve customer satisfaction. Okay, so I'm going to pause right there. Okay, we know who she is. We got a plumbing scheduling app. We know what her value proposition is. Like, why are people going to buy this thing? Okay, next, she says, I spoke with 15 plumbing company owners. Okay, so now we know what side of the market that she's talking to owners. And of the 15 I spoke to, 10 cited scheduling as one of their top 3 activities, right? The only way they're going to know that is if they looked at their data. Okay, they looked at their data and they looked back and they went, gosh, out of the 15, how many mentioned scheduling as one of their top 3 challenges? Oh, well, as it turns out, 10 did. Okay, great. So you've gone back ahead of time, you figured that out, and you're just stating, the data. And so of the 10, right now, a lot of times on your first report out, that's all we get. That's as deep as you want to go because your founders, you're probably high D's on a disc profile, you're charge the hill, take no prisoners. And as soon as you hear someone say something positive, you're like, great, I've confirmed my idea, I'm off and running. Okay, so typically that first week, it kind of ends there. And Crystal and I go, so what else did they say? And you go, I have no idea. I was so excited, I hung up the phone. I was done. And you're like, okay, well, would it have been valuable to maybe dissect that a little bit, get some more information? So what we find is that people over time, they get better at the interviewing. So, they might go one step further after their top 3, challenges. And then you find out that, well, 9 have tried 1 of 4 different scheduling apps, right? So you took the time to say, well, have you tried something? Yes. So now I know that 9 out of 10 did. Well, what did you try? Was there a name for the one that you were trying? And they found out there was 4 different apps, right? So 9 people have tried 1 of 4 different apps to help them with scheduling. 1 of the 10 companies employs a full-time person. It costs them 50 grand a year. 4 out of 10 seem to be satisfied with their current solution. 5 out of 10 indicated frustrations. Oh, really? What were those frustrations, you ask? Oh, I'm glad you asked, Don. Well, 1 has problem with appointment or automated appointment reminders. 2 have problems syncing schedules. 2 have problems with billing. But all 5 indicated that the system wasn't very intuitive and required training. Okay, these are all good things to know. But this is, 1 set of interviews. We do this multiple weeks. You're going to have a treasure trove of features and benefits that you might want to design into version 1 of your product. Now, if you've already done version 1, you've already spent some money, like I said, perfectly natural, perfectly okay. We're just going to shut it down for a little while until we know what people really want. Then we're going to go build the thing they really want. Why? Because there's a pretty good chance they'll buy it if we're building what they're asking for, as opposed to building something that we think they want, right? That's a great way to waste time and money. What they're learning here kind of finish this thought is that scheduling is the issue for 2/3 of the plumbing companies, and half of those are having an issue with training employees on the system, getting their features to work correctly. So what are you going to do about it? Well, next week, I'm going to speak to 15 people who have utilized plumbers to fix plumbing issues in their home to understand what they value, right? Price, appointment time, appointment range, flexibility, job quality, that kind of thing. So we're going to interview another side of the market. Okay. Pretty simple. We're going to be able to give you some really great feedback on that kind of a report out. Crystal, is there anything you want to add here?
No.
Okay. Well, we're getting ready to release you guys into the wild. So for more on next steps, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues at Launch New York, and they'll tell you kind of how to take the next step here.
So guys, it's really gonna be up to you. Do you want to be the Bradley, right, who just kind of runs out, builds, spins? And I'm still friends with Bradley, and he still laughs at himself. This was years ago. He still laughs at himself, and he still remembers how unprepared he felt to take that product to market because he just simply didn't spend a lot of time, talking and listening to humans and listening to what they wanted and needed and documenting it and keeping good track and good notes. And the only way you're going to be able to show up to a meeting with us to do a great report out is, like Don's saying, if you've spent some time, right, talking and listening to these folks, taking good notes, and then spending time with your notes and with your spreadsheets. So by the time you get to us, you know what you learned. You feel really comfortable with what you heard, and you can share with us. We're going to be excited to hear what you learned in these interviews, all the good stuff and all the bad stuff, right? All the yeses and all the nos. So really, again, it's going to come down to you. You want to be a Bradley who doesn't do this type of work and is trying to take a product out into the market, just, not having all the answers and not having all the support. that he could have had backing him, or do you want to be a Sarah who, you know, took, I think she said she took a whole year to really sit down with people and talk to them and listen and keep good notes and document and keep track of what you're learning and finding, and, you know, having that shape the direction that you take your new exciting business in. Okay, so once we send you out into the world to start interviewing, you're going to have access to a dashboard. We call this the Customer Discovery Workshop dashboard. This is a visual screenshot of what the dashboard will look like to you. That link that's highlighted, that's what you use. I save that link. You can bookmark it. I have it in an email, so I know exactly where it is, so I can always come back. What we have found over the years is that people aren't remembering to schedule their sessions, or they're scheduling the wrong session. So that's why we're spending some time just to help you understand how to navigate that dashboard. So we've also cleaned up the dashboard. There's 3 options that you can choose from, okay? So on a regular cadence, as Don shared with you, we're expecting 10 to 15 interviews roughly every week. If it goes to every 2 weeks, we understand. If you start getting beyond that, and now we've built internally a tracking system so we can keep track of your interviewing, and we can kind of help you stay on some sort of a schedule. But the expectation is that every week or so, you are going to book using that option number 1, and you can read it. We put detailed descriptions in there. It says interview learning report out session, okay? And we described why you would choose that option and when you want to book it. So if you guys aren't familiar with Calendly, what Calendly is able to do when you choose that option is scan Don's calendar and scan my calendar, and only show you options where Don and I are available together, because we want to show up together to give you full support to be able to hear what you learned at your interviews. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're selecting the interview learning report out session at the right time, so that you get the outcome that you want, which is Don and I show up and we're ready to hear what you learned. So you're going to do that in intervals, right? So your 15th interview, roughly, we understand it's not going to be a perfect science, but your 15th interview, your 30th interview, your 45th interview, and so on and so on, we will show up to meet with you to discuss what you learned, okay? Now, along this path, there's going to be times where you're not ready. You don't have your interviews ready yet. Okay, something's going on, something came up at a session, you have a random question, and you just want to talk to one of us for just a few minutes, pick our brain, get some feedback, get a strategy, but not do a full report out. Then we've given you individual options that you can choose to be able to book one of us, okay? So we won't be showing up together. So what you don't want to do, we've seen this happen over the years, pitfalls, someone will basically book Don on an individual session, but they wanted me to be there. Okay, so you have to book the right session so that you can achieve your desired outcome. So we've given you an option. So that second option there is you just want to pick Don's brain about something, just a few minutes. He'll jump on, answer a couple questions. It's not a formal report out. You didn't expect Crystal Callahan to be there. Great, that's fine. That's when you use that second option to book just Don. We've also given you an option just to talk to me. You want to throw something at me, you want to get some feedback, you want to hear my perspective on something that happened in a specific interview. You would book this individual session. It says, I have more questions for Crystal C, right? It is not a formal report out session. And you would book me. Calendly will only check my calendar. I will show up to chat with you for a few minutes and we're done. So I'm just reminding you and encouraging you, pay attention to the details of what session you're trying to book. book so that you can do a formal report out using the first button where Don and Crystal will show up together to hear what you've learned, or you have two different options on the dashboard where you can just book a few minutes with Don to ask questions, or you can just book a session with Crystal C to ask questions, not a formal report out. All right, and so now it's time for the summary by the beautiful and talented Crystal Wallace.
Thank you, Crystal Callahan. Thank you, Don. Love all that was shared over the last 3 videos. And I love the fact that they are videos. So you can go back and you can review what was shared in video 1. You can go back and you can review what was shared in video 2. And you can do that right before you're in the session that you book with them so that you're prepared. So you don't have to walk in there blindly. They just talked about reviewing your spreadsheet information before you walk into it, come into your session with them. Do the same thing with these sessions as well, making sure that you're prepared. But just to summarize, how to find people and how to do proper customer discovery according to Launch New York was described and discussed here. So we want to make sure that you feel armed and prepared to go out there into the world, as Crystal Callahan and Don said, and also know how to connect and schedule your sessions with them. Crystal went over it very clearly. So if you need to hear it again, make sure you rewind and take a look and listen to the Calendly page and listen to the video. But we are just excited that you are at this place where you're ready to move on into interviewing and speaking with your potential customers, but we're not looking at them as customers, just potential market individuals who might be interested in your product, and loving that you'll be able to incorporate that information into your investment prep documentation. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Mia and she'll give you some next steps.
Awesome. That concludes our 3rd customer discovery workshop introduction video. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to end our last video with another quote. This one is from Kim Lewis, the founder of CurlMix. And she says, "The best entrepreneurs and athletes have a short memory. If it's not working, do something different. A lot of times fear holds people back and keeps them doing the same thing over and over for longer than they should be doing it." I think that's a great quote to end our introduction videos, just recapping on what Don and Crystal have been talking about all 3 videos. Your next step will be to book a 60-minute follow-up session with both Don and Crystal Callahan using the Calendly link that has been provided. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Great work, guys. See you next time.